Baby Park is one of the most notorious tracks in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, but while most of the courses in this game are memorable for their variety and creativity in track layout, Baby Park is well known for the complete opposite reason. It's a simple oval, about as basic of a track as you can get, and it's really short. So short, in fact, that you can drift around the entire thing in one go. But one day, as I was trying to figure out how many times I could do this in a row, I had a thought. Is it possible to drift around an entire lap on any other courses? It seems like the answer should be a definite no. Every other track in this game, no matter how simplistic, has turns in both directions. Now, the obvious exception to this is Excitebike Arena, but the problem with this one is that it's got these massive straightaways that are far too long to drift around. But here's the thing, if you keep drifting in one direction, eventually you're going to be facing the other way. So at a corner, it should be possible to go all the way around and shoot off in the other direction without releasing it, allowing you to make some of these turns. And this looping technique could even allow us to move down straightaways by extending the drift down the course and shortening it at the edges. But this requires quite a bit of space. Most tracks aren't wide enough for looping like this, and the ones that are generally require very precise brake drifting in order to keep the turning circle small enough, so we need to pick our target carefully. My first thought was to try to find courses that were as close to being circles as possible. On Dry Desert, I was able to drift all the way down this straightaway, but then I get to this winding section where the road is simply too thin to circle drift on. Moo Meadows fails to a very similar flaw in the cow section, but Sherbet Land looked a bit more promising. It has a pretty wide road compared to most tracks, especially in the two ice sections. I was able to get to the first one of these by starting a drift and then mushrooming over this hill. From there, it was pretty trivial to circle drift my way over to the entrance of the cave, where I entered and encountered my first obstacle. Right in the middle, there's a very sharp left-hand turn, made even more difficult to navigate by this pillar in the middle of the track. I tried circle drifting around the corner, but it was just a bit too thin. I kept bonking into this wall, and while I was getting extremely close to making it around, I simply couldn't without shrinking my drifting circle somehow. But luckily for us, this is actually possible with kart stats. Now, traditional wisdom would tell us to try and maximize the handling stat, because it allows you to turn in a much tighter circle than normal. But in this case, we also need to worry about the traction stat, because it allows you to better control your kart on slippery roads like the snow on Sherbet Land. I tried making it around the corner again, and it seemed a lot closer. I discovered that if I got as far to the left as possible without bouncing off the wall, I could get incredibly close to making it around, but after attempting this for a while, I decided to take a break and check if the rest of the track was doable. Luckily, the last part of the tunnel beyond the turn is pretty wide, so it's possible to circle drift in here. I exited the tunnel and was able to mushroom across the snowy part to make it into the ice section, in which it was pretty easy to get over to the finish line and complete the course. Which meant that the only thing preventing me from drifting around the entire thing was this one corner. Despite my best efforts, I wasn't able to make it around this thing and decided to move on to the next course. And for this one, the choice was obvious. Toad's Turnpike. But before that, I need to tell you about this video's sponsor, REDMAGIC, and their brand new gaming phone, the XS Pro. The XS Pro is completely built with performance in mind. The Snapdragon 8 Elite and 16GB of RAM in this thing have made it so that I literally cannot find a single game where I can't crank the settings to max and still run at an incredibly smooth frame rate. And this ridiculous performance is augmented further by the display. It has a resolution of 1.5K, runs it up to 144 Hz, has 2000 nits at peak brightness, and due to the fact that the screen takes up nearly the entire front of the phone, annoying bezels are practically non-existent. But the real magic of this phone isn't found on the front, but the side. Over here, you have your normal phone stuff, like volume and power buttons, but by far the most notable thing here is the red switch. This can be programmed to do quite a few different things, like activate the flashlight or camera, but by default, it's set to open and close game space, which is REDMAGIC's dedicated game loader and overlay. Also on the side is the exhaust for the gaming fan, which is used to keep the phone cool under load. But the final two buttons on the side are easily my favorite part of this phone. They might not look like much, but these are actually 520 Hz shoulder triggers that can be programmed to pretty much any input. Using these in Mario Kart Tour to get accurate drifting and item usage controls makes it feel like a completely different game, and the customizability that these have makes them compatible with pretty much any application. Overall, the REDMAGIC XS Pro is simply the best phone for mobile gaming, so if you're interested, make sure to use the link in the description to pick one up for yourself. And now, back to drifting. Now, this track has two turns, one to each direction, but it is easily the widest track in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and even better, there's no off-road. I started the course, but after making it past the first turn, I almost immediately realized that I had a problem. These cars kept getting in my way when I would swing around for the back part of the circle, and I couldn't find any way to get around them without releasing the drift. But then it hit me. I don't need to get past them. I just need to drift right. You see, when the race begins, the game gives you a short buffer of open road to avoid cramming. So if I do my looping at the first corner, I won't have to deal with any traffic. And then I can simply drift around the last corner, which should hopefully make the cars a non-issue. After a few attempts at this, I was able to make it all the way through the straight section, but I hit a car at the last turn. But then, I managed to make it past the final section and barely cross over the finish line, completing a lap. This was a great start, but I knew there had to be more. Since Toad's Turnpike had worked so well, I decided to attempt the other highway course, Moonview. This is also a fairly wide track, and the overall car density is less than on Turnpike. But the problem is the beginning. This stretch is much thinner and has quite a few cars on it that show up fairly soon into the race. I was able to do one loop at the beginning by going over this hill, but once I got to here, it became impossible to go any farther. At this point, I was feeling kinda lost. I had tried pretty much all of the courses that I could think of, but then I realized I needed to try Waluigi Stadium. Now, the reason this hadn't occurred to me earlier is because this course has pretty sharp corners in both directions. But it is fairly wide at most parts, so maybe this one was doable. I started my drift and was able to make it around the first corner easily. Then I held the drift wide to make it down this straight section with the fire before coming around this sharp turn. And that's when I encountered my first major obstacle. This next section of track consists of a thin bridge that leads into the first left turn. I tried just going over this, but when I landed, I was moving too fast and was too close to the wall to make it around. I tried a lot of different ways to approach these boost panels, but essentially every time I would either run into the wall immediately after landing or be so far to the right that I simply got picked up by Lakitu. But then something interesting happened. I hit the very edge of the wall, which caused me to be bonked backwards really far while still retaining my drift, which gave me enough space to make it around. I mushroomed across the off-road, but this gave me way too much speed, so I ran into the wall and my drift ended. I came back to this spot to see if there was any way to make it across without losing the drift, and while I couldn't find a way of mushrooming that worked, I realized that the part off to the right looked large enough to circle drift in. From there, the next straightaway and left turn were just more circle drifting, and once I got to the piranha plant section, moving became a lot easier due to the extra space. At the end of this, I tried to make it around the next corner, but I hit the wall, which forced me to reset. I decided to plan out this turn before attempting the entire thing again, but when I got there, I soon realized that the situation was a lot worse than I had initially thought. After this turn, there's a long straightaway that's far too thin to loop around in, meaning that we need to complete this section in one single drift. But it seemed barely possible, so I started my attempts. I was able to loop around fairly consistently, but I would always end up facing into the wall and crashing. There were a few variations to this. Sometimes I would fly straight over the green part, and others I would simply crash into the wall. Regardless, all of my attempts resulted in the drift ending. But then, something interesting happened. I had somehow gotten high enough up on the wall that my cart turned around in time and allowed me to drift all the way down to the straight section. From there, I circle drifted around the off-road and almost made it to the finish line, but fell off right before. But the thing is, I had already tested this section and proved it to be possible, which meant that there were no more barriers preventing me from making it all the way around. So I started attempts at the full lap. And after only a few hours of trying, this happened. Waluigi Stadium can be completed in a single drift, which raised the total number of courses to 3. But the other thing it did was prove to me that even tracks with lots of opposing turns could be candidates. So I decided to try LA Laps. LA Laps is a section track, meaning the path changes on each lap, but the one I was interested in was the first. There are 3 to 4 right turns on this course, but for the majority you need to go left, so that's the direction I started my drift. Once I fell from this ledge, I began looping down this stretch of sand and around this corner. Once I got to this point, I had to find a way to get past this set of ramps. All of the raised portions have boost panels on them, but the small slice of sand off to the right is open, so I went for that. After making it through, I was able to very precisely brake drift to avoid bonking any walls and barely make it around the corner. The next turn is to the left, so that was easy enough. But then we get to a right turn where the track is just a bit too thin for looping. So this track was a bust as well. I was about to call it and just be happy with the 3 I had when one final track occurred to me: Tokyo Blur. Now, the problems with this course are immediately apparent. The road is incredibly thin with walls right on the edges, which gives us very little space to work with. This is made worse by the fact that many parts of this track have long straightaways and barely any open spaces where you could loop at corners, making pretty much every part seem hopeless, except for Lap 2. Lap 2 consists of 3 major turns, which are, importantly, all in the same direction. Now, they are connected by 2 turns to the left, but these corners are special. At both, the only thing covering the right side of the track are these arrow projections, which give us way more space to work with. Despite this, circle drifting here with the maximum handling combo still seemed impossible, but after I changed the CC to 150, I was able to barely make it work. The problem with this, however, is that lowering my speed this much makes the rest of the lap way harder. For example, on 200cc, you can make it all the way from the finish line to the first left turn pretty easily with one drift. However, on 150, you can barely make it to here. But that's where our greatest tool comes into play: these walls. You see, when you mushroom into one of these at an angle, you get bounced off really far. So by intentionally making my drift a bit shorter and mushrooming into this curb, I can ricochet off all the way to the far wall. At this point, I have enough speed to repeatedly jam myself into it until I make it to the left turn. Since I'm as far to the side as possible, I should have the perfect angle for this loop, but it's still incredibly tight. Once I get past this, all I have to do is make it down this stretch of track, do one more incredibly tight loop, and drift through this last turn to the finish line. All of these parts individually are difficult, but I couldn't find any reason why they wouldn't be able to be combined, so I started attempting a full lap. After 2 hours at this, I finally got onto a decent run. I had a good bounce off the curb, and after making it through the thwomp section, I perfectly executed the first left turn and headed for the second. But that's when it all went wrong. I entered the turn too soon, and as I was coming around, I bonked off the curb at a bad angle, which ended the drift. I had a few more good attempts, but none that got as far as that one. But then, at 5 hours in, another one came my way. My bounce off of the wall was rough, but I was able to recover enough that I had a phenomenal entry into the first left turn. From here, I successfully looped around it and prepared myself for the final piece. I still hit the curb, but somehow I was still in the drift. I was able to mushroom across this small bit of grass, and from here I just had to hope that I still had the right alignment to cross the line. But then, on the frame before I hit the wall, I finished the lap. And with this finally completed, Tokyo Blur Lap 2 became the 4th to be completed in a single drift. And that's it. While there are a few more that I could maybe see happening, I don't think anyone is going to do these for a while. And if you enjoyed this video, subscribe.